Hey guys, tonight we begin one of the darkest, most tragic, and yet strangely human stories in modern history, the Great War, what we now call World War I. You've probably heard the basics: trenches, mustard gas, a lot of mud, and an assassination that somehow triggered a 4-year bloodbath. But this story isn't just about generals and treaties, it's about the letters that never reached home, the love affairs paused by uniforms, and the soldiers who went to war thinking they'd be back by Christmas and found themselves buried in Flanders fields instead. So get comfortable, dim the lights, and maybe keep a handkerchief nearby. This one's a long journey through mud, memory, and the machinery of history. We begin in the summer of 1914, not with bullets or bombs, but with a buttoned-up drawing room in London, where one young man is about to make a decision that will change everything. August 1st, 1914. The sunlight over London was indifferent to headlines. It spilled lazily through the windows of a Kensington townhouse, warming the upholstery and glinting off a silver teapot, as though nothing were wrong. But war was coming, fast. Edward Locksley, 19, stared out at the passing milk cart, like it might carry answers. His mother, Lady Constance, hadn't looked up from her embroidery. "You're not enlisting," she said flatly. "I've already decided," Edward replied. "You're not a soldier," she hissed. "You're a Locksley." He turned, face pale but stubborn. "Then let me fight like one." In the distance, Big Ben rang 4 times. The last chime sounded like a funeral bell. August 2nd. In a small French village near the German border, Corporal Wilhelm sat beneath an apricot tree, ink-stained and sunburnt, writing to his sister Elise. "We are told Paris will fall in weeks. I don't believe it. This place is too beautiful for war. Even the church chickens look unbothered." He paused. One of the men was singing a marching song, off-key and too loud. The French family who owned the vineyard had locked themselves inside, watching from behind the curtains like prisoners in their own home. "The officers say it will be over soon. They always say that. Tell Mother I still carry the photograph. Wilhelm." He folded the letter and kissed it before sealing it with wax. He didn't know it, but Elise would never read it. The train carrying it would be shelled near Liège 3 days later. August 4th. Brussels. They heard them before they saw them. Boots, thousands striking cobblestones in brutal rhythm. Children were pulled from fountains. Church bells were silenced. German soldiers marched through the Place Royale, not with the thrill of conquest, but the precision of a well-oiled machine. British Ambassador Sir Francis Villiers stood rigid behind his embassy gates, watching Belgium's neutrality evaporate in real time. Back in London, Prime Minister Asquith was handed a telegram as he prepared his notes for Parliament. His hands trembled. Britain had given Germany an ultimatum. It expired at midnight. The lamps were going out all over Europe. No one knew when they would be lit again. Edward dropped the postcard into the Kensington postbox without hesitating. The message was simple, written with the urgency of someone running out of time. "Gone to Aldershot, London Rifles. Please understand." At the station, he saw boys younger than himself, trying to look older. Borrowed uniforms, proud chins, trembling hands. One of them had drawn a moustache on with charcoal. He took his seat on the train, clutching his enlistment papers like a passport to manhood. As the whistle blew, he thought of his mother's teacups, his father's fencing medals, and the fact that he had never even been punched in the face. The train cut through southern England as dusk wrapped the fields in shadow. Edward sat across from a man with soot-blackened hands and a scar down one cheek. "First time?" the man asked. Edward nodded. "You?" The man laughed. "Fought the Boers. Different war. Still hurts." They fell into silence. Outside, cows grazed, oblivious to Europe cracking open like an egg. As the train chugged toward the coast, Edward closed his eyes. He dreamed of nothing but fog. August 8th, 1914. The sea was grey and bitter, spitting spray across the deck of the transport ship SS Haverford. Edward gripped the rail and stared at the outline of England disappearing behind them. Next to him, Sergeant Webb lit a cigarette with a trembling match. "You ever shot a man?" he asked. "No," Edward said, not turning. "Neither did I, my first time." And then suddenly, Below deck, the men sang, nervously, quietly. Someone passed around a flask of gin. Edward took a sip and coughed. It tasted like fire. France appeared on the horizon like a smudge. They were told to keep quiet. No lights, no flags, no farewells. Just war now. August 10th. In the dense woods of the Ardennes, Wilhelm's boots sank into wet moss. His regiment had been marching for hours. No maps, no rest, only vague orders to press forward. The first time he saw French cavalry, it was almost by accident. Blue coats flashed through the trees, a trumpet call, then chaos. Gunfire, screams, a horse reared and collapsed. Wilhelm found himself crouched behind a log, breathing fast, bayonet shaking in his hands. Someone shouted, "Advance," in clipped Saxon German. He didn't move. He couldn't remember pulling the trigger, but his rifle was hot and empty. A boy in a French cap was sprawled face down nearby, unmoving. The woods were quiet again. August 23rd. The British Expeditionary Force had taken up position near the Belgian town of Montset. Canals to their left, slag heaps to their right. The officers handed out chocolates and pamphlets titled "How to Fight the Hun." Edward crouched in a ditch, fingers wrapped around his Lee-Enfield rifle like a lifeline. His helmet felt too large, his mouth too dry, his mouth too dry. "They're coming," whispered Webb. And they did. Wave after wave of German infantry moved across the fields in perfect formation. Too perfect, too visible. "Wait for my mark," said the lieutenant, hand raised. When it dropped, 70,000 rifles opened fire. Men fell like wheat. August 24th. Retreat. No trumpets, no orders shouted with pride. Just the word whispered like a funeral hymn. Retreat. Edward's feet bled. His pack dug into his shoulders. Every bone in his body ached with fatigue. "We weren't supposed to fall back," he muttered. Webb handed him a crust of bread. "We weren't supposed to bleed this much either." The countryside blurred past them. Burned farms, abandoned carts, and terrified villagers pointing south. The men called it the Great Retreat. 60 miles in 6 days. Horses dropped dead in the road. One man threw away his boots and walked barefoot until he collapsed. The postcards home remained unwritten. August 26th. Le Cateau. Wilhelm crouched in the ruins of a farmhouse. The smell of blood and manure thick in his nostrils. He had not eaten in 2 days. His regiment had been decimated outside Charleroi. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Elise's last letter. "Stay warm. Stay kind. Don't forget the boy who helped Mother mend the stove." He reread it twice before folding it away. Outside, artillery shook the sky like angry gods. Wilhelm looked up, lips moving silently in prayer. Not for victory, not even for survival. Just for the chance to see home again. September 6th, 1914. The French capital held its breath. German forces were just 30 miles from the Eiffel Tower. Parisians packed their belongings. Some hid in wine cellars. Others fled south by train. Then something strange happened. General Gallieni requisitioned every taxi in the city. Hundreds of cabs, red, black, and yellow, lined up at night, headlights covered, engines rattling. They drove toward the front, each one packed with 5 men and a rifle. Soldiers cheered as the Eiffel Tower disappeared behind them. An army arrived in Renaults, and the Germans didn't see it coming. Edward crouched in a beetroot field outside the Marne River. The Germans had advanced too far, too fast. Now they were stretched thin. "Fix bayonets," came the cry. The metal clicked as men obeyed. Edward's hands trembled as he slid the blade into place. He could hear his heart louder than the shells. The charge was chaos. Screaming, rifle smoke, bodies hitting mud. Edward tripped over a helmet and kept running. He didn't know who he stabbed, just that his arm went numb, and when it was over, he was covered in blood, some of it not his. Sergeant Webb found him under a shattered cart. "You did well," he said. Edward vomited beside him. September 10th. Rain turned the roads into soup. Wilhelm's boots had split at the toes. His captain was dead. His best friend Hans had lost an eye and didn't know it yet. The German army pulled back from the Marne, unsure of what had just happened. "We were told Paris would fall." Wilhelm wrote a lease on a scrap of paper. "Now they say it doesn't matter. Now they say dig, so we are digging." He had blisters on both palms, no dry socks, and no idea what came next. But the shovels kept scraping, and scraping, and scraping. Edward sat alone near a campfire. Rain hissed on the flames. He held Webb's notebook in his lap. The sergeant had gone out on a night patrol and never come back. They found his helmet the next morning. Edward flipped through the pages. Sketches, field notes, one torn-out corner addressed to Maggie. A list of names filled the final page. Men from their unit, some crossed out. He found his own name, still uncrossed. He shut the book and added another log to the fire, blinking hard against the smoke. By late September, both sides had stopped moving. They didn't plan for it. It just happened. Exhaustion, mud, rifles jammed with grit, no flank left to turn. So they dug trenches, first shallow, then deep. Soon they had names: Suicide Ditch, Worm Alley, Hell's Front Porch. Wilhelm watched men disappear into the earth. Edward's unit built a fire step and urinated into a trench latrine, dug 2 feet from where they slept. Everyone agreed. This wasn't temporary. The war had become a grave they were building in real time, one shovel at a time. October 1914. Edward scratched again, just below his collar. The lice were worse than the shells, he thought. At least the shells had the decency to announce themselves. A chaplain passed by with a bag of letters. Edward took his with numb fingers. It was from his younger sister, full of school gossip and questions about Belgium. He read it 3 times. It was the only thing that felt clean. The lice didn't care about family, neither did the frost. The infection started in Wilhelm's left thumb, a cut from a rusted shovel. Within days, his whole hand was red and swollen. He was pulled from the trench and taken to a field hospital behind the lines. Mud-slick boots clomped past him on stretchers. Somewhere nearby, someone screamed in French. A nurse wrapped his hand and muttered, "Lucky it wasn't gas." Wilhelm didn't feel lucky. He hadn't fired his rifle in 3 days. He wasn't sure he could again, but he was alive, and that felt strange. The fog rolled in like something summoned. Edward sat on sentry duty, peering out across no man's land. There were bodies still lying there. French, German, British, some propped against the wire like forgotten scarecrows. At night, you could hear moaning, sometimes singing. One night someone shouted a name, over and over. Then silence. Edward asked his commanding officer if they would retrieve the corpses. The reply was short: "We'd need a second army just for that." Snow fell in early December, soft, almost silent. It blanketed the filth and dead with a terrible innocence. Wilhelm watched it cover a boot sticking out of the trench wall. No one remembered who it belonged to anymore. Some men said the snow made them feel peaceful. Others hated it. "Makes you forget it's a war," someone muttered. The lice didn't die in the cold, but the men started to dream again. For the first time in months, Christmas morning near Ypres, a strange sound echoed across no man's land. Singing. Then others joined in. British soldiers humming Silent Night in nervous harmony. Edward peeked over the trench wall. A German stood with arms raised, holding a Christmas tree. No shots fired. Within an hour, men from both sides were shaking hands, swapping cigarettes. One German traded his sausage for Edward's tinned beef. Someone produced a football. For one freezing day, the war stopped. They buried the dead together, and then they went back to their sides. December 27th, 1914. The truce was over. Officially, it had never happened, but the brass were furious. Commanders sent new orders. Any fraternization with the enemy will be treated as treason. Edward read the typed memo aloud. Treason for a handshake, he muttered. The sergeant nodded. We gave them a day of peace, and now they want blood again. The next night, machine gun fire resumed. Deliberate, loud, as if to prove something. January 1915. Wilhelm stepped down into the trench and felt the icy water seep into his boots. It never drained. It just waited. He tried drying his socks over a candle. It only singed them. Corpsmen made rounds with iodine and warnings. Change your socks or lose your toes, they said. Wilhelm's toes were already pale and swollen. A friend from Leipzig had his amputated yesterday. He screamed the whole time. No one blamed him. Edward flipped through the quartermaster's notebook. Boots, 47 pairs. Dry socks, 13. Rations, 3 days late. Men, 93. Down from 129. He closed the book. The captain asked, How's morale? Edward answered honestly. Low. Good, the captain replied. They'll stay alert. That night, Edward heard Private Talbot crying into his blanket. No one said anything. No one ever did. Wilhelm couldn't sleep, so he wrote, scratching lines onto the back of a torn ration box with pencil stub. Mud is the god here. Shells are the prayers, and we are the candles. Burning into the earth, he didn't show anyone. He tucked the box into his coat, next to Elise's last letter. Somewhere behind the lines, they were issuing new helmets. Somewhere ahead, there were new graves. Edward kept a small sketchbook. It had once been for scenery, trees, maybe Oxford Towers. Now he drew faces, people from his unit, Talbot, Webb, Corporal Singh, the new boy with the stammer. Each time someone didn't come back, Edward drew them from memory. By the end of January, 5 pages were filled, and he'd stopped adding names. April 22nd, 1915. Ypres. The wind shifted. A greenish haze rolled across no man's land. At first, Edward thought it was morning mist. Then the shouting began, coughing, screaming. Gas! Gas! He fumbled for his gas mask, canvas, goggles, filters stuffed with cotton and urine-soaked cloth. Too slow. Private Adler next to him didn't move fast enough. He was clawing at his throat, eyes wide, frothing. Edward dragged him back, but the gas was in their trench now. It smelled like death dipped in garlic and copper. And it wasn't over. Wilhelm stood knee-deep in wet soil. The trench wall gave way, and a man from the next regiment was sucked into the earth like a rag doll. Help, he cried, then vanished under a slurry of mud and rotten boards. Wilhelm grabbed a shovel. He dug with bare hands when the blade broke, but the trench was a living thing now. It ate faster than he could dig. After an hour, they found a boot. That was all. Back behind the front, a line of stretchers stretched half a mile. Edward sat near the end, his left ear ringing from an artillery blast. Blood seeped from his scalp. His fingers felt like someone else's. A nurse pressed a cloth to his temple. Name, she asked. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Name? He blinked, then whispered. Edward. Loxley. She wrote it down. He watched her. Like if he stopped looking, he'd disappear too. Above Wilhelm's trench, a buzzing sound. Not bees, not birds, something worse. A biplane. British. It dropped something, cylindrical, screaming as it fell. The explosion turned the dugout beside him into a pit. He dove face first into slime. When he surfaced, his sergeant was gone. Just an arm, still twitching. Later that night, Wilhelm scribbled a line in his notebook. The sky is no longer ours. Edward tried to write. Dear Mother, I am well. He stopped. We are holding our position. It is very wet. He crossed it out. Tell Eleanor, I got her parcel. The biscuits were... No, the biscuits had been eaten by rats. He stared at the blank page. Finally, he wrote just one line. I miss how quiet the world used to be. He folded it, sealed it, and never posted it. May 1915. A week of rain had turned the trench into soup. The walls wept. The sandbags collapsed. Then, in the middle of the night, a groan and a roar, earth giving way. Edward woke to the sound of screaming and mud. He reached for his boots, gone, crawled toward the voices. One of the newer lads, Jenkins, had been buried to the chest. "I can't feel my legs," he gasped. They dug for hours. By the time they freed him, he was blue. He died before dawn. No blood, just cold. Wilhelm sat under a scrap of canvas, reading Elise's letter by matchlight. His hands trembled. "Father is gone. The fever took him quickly. I didn't tell you until now. You needed your strength." Wilhelm read it 5 times, not because he didn't understand, but because he didn't want it to be true. He remembered his father's tobacco-stained fingers, the way he hummed old songs while fixing the stove. "Be safe, Wilhelm. He would have told you to be safe." He folded the letter and didn't speak the rest of the night. Edward found the boy by the latrine trench. He sat on an ammo crate, smiling at nothing. "Name?" Edward asked. The boy blinked. "I think I was in Dublin," he said softly. "Did the war end?" "I think it ended." "Not yet." "Oh." He looked disappointed, then confused. "Is it Monday?" "No." "Oh," the boy said again. They brought him to the medics. He didn't resist, just kept smiling like he'd heard a joke no one else had. A dog wandered into the trench, matted fur, scar across its ear, limping, German, French, British, no one knew. It just showed up. Wilhelm gave it a bit of bread. It stayed. The men named it Schlam, meaning mud. It slept at Wilhelm's feet, barked at incoming shells. For 2 weeks, it was their luck, their distraction, their shared secret. Then one morning, it was gone. Some said it had wandered into no man's land. Others said it was eaten by starving Belgians. Wilhelm didn't ask. Edward dreamed of the sea, not France, not rifles, just blue water stretching forever. His sister was there, laughing. His father, alive again, calling from a rowboat. He woke in the trench, soaked in sweat. "Bad dream?" someone asked. "No," Edward said, "a good one." The other soldier nodded. "Those are the worst." A rat ran across his boot. The sea had vanished. June 1915. It came again, thicker, heavier. Not green this time, yellow, like mustard gone rotten. Edward barely heard the alarm before the fog swallowed their trench. He grabbed his mask, pulled it tight, and prayed the seals held. Next to him, Corporal Singh screamed through the cloth. A man 2 paces away ripped his mask off in panic and clawed at his face. Edward fired blind into the fog, not at enemies, but at his own fear. After 20 minutes, the gas lifted. 4 men didn't move. One still twitched, his eyes milky. There was no victory, just survival. Wilhelm's unit heard the shouting from 3 trenches down. French voices, angry and loud. Someone said they'd refused orders to charge. "They say it's madness," muttered a German corporal. "They're right." By evening, the rumors were official. A battalion of French soldiers had mutinied, refused to leave the trench. One officer pistol-whipped his own men. Wilhelm said nothing, but later that night, he sat staring at the plank floor, his rifle across his knees. He didn't think they were cowards. He thought maybe they were the only sane men left. Edward found it near the wire, buried in a satchel half covered with mud. A leather-bound notebook, water damaged. Pages still legible. The name inside, Thomas R. Calder, a private from a different regiment, declared missing 2 months earlier. Edward read the entries. They started cheerful. "The boys are decent. I miss Sunday roast. Haven't slept in 3 nights. Something's wrong with my breathing. I keep dreaming my boots fill with water, and I drown where I stand." The last page just said, "Tell my mother I didn't mean to go." Edward closed the journal and placed it under his shirt. Wilhelm drew maps, not official ones. His weren't for officers. His maps showed safe corners, dugouts that didn't flood, trees you could hide behind during shell fire. He marked a place he could slip through if it all became too much. A place to run. He never said it aloud. But the map grew more detailed each week. He tucked it behind a loose board in the trench wall. Only Schlam, the dog, had ever seen it. And Schlam was gone. A new sound came to the trench. Not thunder, not guns. A buzz, a hum. Then a scream as something streaked across the clouds and exploded 30 yards down the line. Airplane, someone gasped. They're bombing now. Edward looked up. A black speck circled overhead. He raised his rifle, half out of instinct. The lieutenant barked. "You think you can shoot the sky, Private?" He lowered the barrel. The sky laughed back with another bomb. July 1915. Edward opened the envelope slowly. The handwriting was familiar. His sister Eleanor's looping script. "Mum's unwell. She says she's just tired, but I hear her crying at night. She sets the table for you sometimes, even when it's just us. Please come back, if only for a day." He read it twice, then a third time, then folded it and tucked it into his breast pocket. He didn't reply. He didn't know how. Wilhelm returned from a patrol to find his dugout overturned. His cot gone. His hidden board cracked open. The map gone. Later that night, his lieutenant summoned him. "You planning a holiday, Brandt?" Wilhelm said nothing. "We know desertion when we see it." The officer continued. "Try it, and you'll be fertilizer by morning." He was dismissed without punishment. But when Wilhelm returned to the trench, everything felt colder. Someone had taken his future and folded it into their pocket. Rain again. For hours. Edward's trench groaned, then gave way like a tired man. The eastern wall crumbled in. Clay and debris buried the forward post. 3 men disappeared beneath it. They dug for hours, hands raw, fingernails cracked. One of them, Wainwright, was still breathing, just barely. They dragged him out. His leg was twisted like a branch. "Shoot me," he whispered. "Please." Edward didn't. He just held his hand until the bleeding stopped. They called him Davies. He was found a mile from the trench, in civilian clothes, headed for the Belgian border. They brought him back, tied him to a post. Only a few men were made to watch. Edward was one. Davies trembled, but never cried. The officer read the charges, then gave the order. The rifles fired. Davies slumped forward. No one spoke for the rest of the day. Wilhelm couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces. Some familiar, some not. One night, he saw Schlam again. The dog sitting at the end of his bunk, eyes glowing, watching. He blinked. It was gone. Another night, he heard Elie's voice, calling from no man's land. The medic told him it was trench strain. "Rest more," he said. But rest was where the ghosts lived. Now, August 1915, Edward noticed it first, in Talbot. A long stare, not at anything, just past. "Talbot," he said. No answer. Talbot. Still nothing. The younger man just kept staring across the trench, lips slightly parted, jaw slack. When someone touched his shoulder, he screamed. Not a shout, a scream like a child waking from a nightmare. The medic called it shell shock. Edward called it the point of no return. Wilhelm's unit moved forward to reinforce a shattered trench near Hooge. They passed through a stretch of no man's land that had once been a wheat field. Now it was a mosaic of corpses, half buried, blackened, frozen in twisted gestures. One body's eyes were still open. Wilhelm tried not to look. Another soldier muttered, "They're watching us." Wilhelm didn't argue. He felt it too. In the medical tent, Edward saw a soldier on a stretcher, head bandaged, arm missing. It took him a minute. Then he recognized him. Sergeant Webb. "Still here," Webb rasped, forcing a smile. Edward crouched beside him. "You were on leave. We thought you were gone." "Came back," Webb said. "Didn't want to, but I did." Edward didn't know what to say. He just held his hand. Webb coughed once, and then stopped. The hand went still. They were told to execute 2 captured Frenchmen, suspected of sabotage. Wilhelm protested. They unarmed. His captain didn't care. Make an example. They handed Wilhelm the pistol. He hesitated. The prisoners looked at him. One prayed, one cried. He pulled the trigger. Once, the second shot, another soldier had to take. At night, Wilhelm threw up until there was nothing left. Then he washed his hands, over and over. The blood was gone. The guilt wasn't. As September approached, both Edward and Wilhelm heard the same thing. Whispers of something new. Not gas, not bullets, not bombs. Something silent. Artillery you can't hear until it hits, someone said. Others spoke of ghost shells, weapons that tunneled under the trenches and exploded days later. The earth beneath their boots had become traitorous. And winter was coming again. October 1915. At 3:12 a.m., a portion of Edward's trench lifted into the sky. Not from shell fire, from beneath. A mine laid by German engineers. Months of digging. Then one button. 8 men gone in an instant. Edward, flung backwards, woke to silence. Not even screaming. Just the slow patter of falling dirt. They dug for survivors. Found none. Only a mess tin, a boot, a jawbone with gold fillings. After that, no one slept near that part of the line. They called it the Hollow. Wilhelm was assigned to tunneling duty, deep below the front. No sunlight, just candles, pickaxes, and the sense that the British were digging too. Each day they listened, ears pressed to the dirt, for tapping, breathing, anything. You'll hear them before they hear you, the engineer said. Wilhelm wasn't sure that helped. One night they heard nothing. Then the ceiling cracked. Earth poured in. 2 men were buried alive. Wilhelm dug with bleeding hands, screaming. They never found them. Edward began writing again, not to his mother, not to Eleanor, to Webb. Sergeant, today we lost Jenkins. You wouldn't have liked how it happened. Each letter was tucked into his journal, never posted, never signed. It wasn't for anyone to read. It was to keep his mind from splitting in half. He signed one, just E. It felt enough like goodbye to sting. Wilhelm was granted 3 days rest. Not leave, just less fighting. He was taken to a rear area field hospital. White walls, clean sheets, smells of iodine and rot. He sat beside a man with no lower jaw who drew pictures instead of speaking. Another patient laughed constantly, eyes wide, never blinking. Wilhelm didn't laugh, didn't speak, just watched, and wondered if this place was healing men or collecting them. Edward woke from sleep to a strange sensation. Silence. No guns, no shouting, no wind. Even the rats had stopped moving. He sat up, checked the time, 3:02 a.m. Then a low rumble, far beneath, like the earth holding its breath. Mine, someone whispered. They waited for a minute, then 5. Nothing happened. Edward didn't sleep again that night. Sometimes the worst part wasn't the explosion. It was knowing one might come, any second. November 1915. Wilhelm's unit received orders to retake a cratered outpost, lost days earlier. Suicide, everyone agreed. Open ground, no cover. Hans, Wilhelm's closest friend in the line, stood up. I'll go. He wasn't ordered, he wasn't chosen, he just volunteered. They gave him a revolver, a flare, and a promise no one believed. Wilhelm shook his hand. He wanted to say something meaningful. Instead, he said, "Don't be late for breakfast." Hans didn't smile. He disappeared into the black. The flare never came. Edward noticed something off about Corporal Lyons. He never slept near the others, wrote in a small book, spoke German too well for someone from Kent. Then, during a routine sweep, a sergeant found a coded message hidden under Lyon's mess tin. A court-martial was held in a ruined stable. Lyon didn't deny it, said only, "This war will make liars of all of us." They hanged him by dusk, no band, just a chair and a rope. The frost came fast. Water froze in canteens. Rifle bolts stuck. Rats grew bold, knowing the cold made the men slower. Wilhelm wrapped rags around his boots. His fingers split open by midday. His nose bled from the wind. The medic said, "Keep moving or you'll lose toes." Movement meant exposure. So he stayed still and hoped frostbite came slow. Edward opened his rations and found a slip of paper tucked inside. Not from home, from whoever packed it. A penciled line. "Keep breathing. They'll end it eventually." No signature. He showed it to no one. Just folded it and placed it behind Webb's old notebook. The next time he felt himself fading, he opened it and read the words aloud. Just once. Color. Late November. British command called in select men for a briefing. Edward was one of them. Maps were spread on a table. Arrows, red circles. Too many dates. Too many hopes. The Somme. A major offensive. June or July. Decisive victory, they said. Break the line, they said. Edward looked at the numbers. The width of the front. The German fortifications. He didn't believe a word, but he nodded. Because hope was the only rations left. Wilhelm wrote in darkness, hunched beside a broken beam. "Elise, if this is ever found, and I hope it isn't, tell them I wasn't brave, just tired. I no longer dream of coming home. I dream of silence, love, Traman and Berlin." He didn't sign his full name. He folded the letter, placed it in a rusted tin, and buried it under the duckboards. He didn't want it read while he was still breathing. Edward was assigned to train the replacements. Most were 17. Some lied and were younger. One still had braces. They asked questions about medals, about girls, about glory. He didn't answer most of them. When they asked about bayonets, he said, "Use it only if you're already crying." They laughed. He didn't. December 15th, 1915. The trench floor froze solid. Shovels bounced off it. Latrines overflowed. Shell craters turned to ice bowls that snapped ankles. A man froze in his sleep. They found him still sitting upright, blanket over his face like a shroud. Wilhelm didn't feel the cold anymore. That worried him. Christmas passed in silence. No carols, no handshakes, no football matches in the mud. Command had made it clear. Any attempt at truce would be punished. Edward sat on a crate and lit a cigarette sent from home. He didn't smoke it, just held it, let it burn between his fingers. A few trenches down, machine guns rattled, mechanical, indifferent. It snowed quietly. A chaplain came through the line. He knelt in the trench, reciting scripture over frostbitten men. Wilhelm listened from a distance. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death," Wilhelm whispered the rest to himself, "I will fear no evil," not because he believed it, but because it reminded him of his father. January 1916. Edward was summoned by his lieutenant. The man handed him a small silver whistle and a folded map. "You'll be leading the charge when the time comes," he said. "Congratulations." Edward stared at the whistle. It didn't feel like an honor. It felt like a death sentence in polished tin. He tucked it away, didn't tell the others. He didn't want them to see the shaking in his hands. Wilhelm's new assignment was supposed to be easier. A rear trench near Fricourt. Minimal enemy contact. That lasted 3 days. Then the shells came, daily, random. One hit the cook tent. Another landed inside the latrine, killing 2 men mid-sentence. At night, Wilhelm counted the seconds between flashes. He told himself 5 seconds was safety, 3 meant death. One night, there were no seconds, just fire. Edward sat in a stone barn with 20 others. A captain used a stick to point at a map drawn in chalk on the floor. "The Somme," he said. "June. Our artillery will fire for a full week before we go over. The enemy will be dust by then." Murmurs of approval. Edward raised his hand. "And if they're not?" The captain stared at him. "Then you keep walking." Someone was stealing. Biscuits, letters, a photo of a girl in a bathing dress. Petty things, but it unnerved everyone. Suspicion crawled through the ranks like lice. Edward finally caught the thief, a boy named Maury, 16, shivering, no gloves. "I just wanted something that reminded me of home," he said. Edward said nothing, just walked away. He never told the others. In Wilhelm's trench, someone started a library, 2 crates of battered books looted from a schoolhouse. Dickens, Goethe, Jules Verne. They passed them like treasure. Wilhelm read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by candlelight, each sentence an escape tunnel. When the shelling grew close, he gripped the book tighter. He didn't care if it was fiction. It made him feel human again. April 1916. Edward began counting the days until the offensive, then the hours, then the minutes between shell bursts. He carved marks into his rifle butt. Not out of superstition, just rhythm, something to measure time by. Each morning he rubbed one off with a thumb. One fewer, one closer, one heartbeat nearer to the whistle. Wilhelm found Otto slumped against the trench wall, blood pooling around his boots. His rifle lay across his lap, barrel in his mouth, trigger pulled. No note, just a folded photograph of Otto's wife and daughter. The medic said nothing, just lit a cigarette, handed one to Wilhelm. They smoked beside the body until the stretcher came. No ceremony, just silence. Edward was chosen to carry a message tube to the signal post. As he approached, he saw a pigeon handler cradling a bird, tucking a tiny scroll into its leg canister. "Reinforcements running late," he muttered. "Too dangerous to send a man." The handler kissed the bird's head and released it into the sky. It vanished over the trees. They never found out if it reached anyone, but it felt like hope, briefly flapping above the wire. In Wilhelm's sector, the gravediggers stopped digging by hand. Too many bodies. They used shovels, then wheelbarrows, then dynamite to blast new plots. Crosses went up faster than names could be carved. A chaplain gave last rites over 10 men at once. Wilhelm stood nearby and whispered none of their names. Because he didn't know them. Because they didn't last long enough to introduce themselves. Edward woke with burning joints, a pounding head, and a rash climbing his chest. "Trench fever," the medic said, "caused by lice." Again, they gave him aspirin and a cot that smelled of mildew and morphine. He lay still, watching the candle flicker on the wooden beam above. He thought of London, the river, the cold steps of the museum. He would have given anything to sit on a bench and not hear guns, even just once. Edward received one last parcel from Sussex. Inside, shortbread, a folded letter, and a pressed violet. The note from Eleanor read, "Mum is worse, but she prays for you mostly. Come back if you can, but if you can't, try to stay yourself." He read it 3 times, ate one biscuit, then put the violet in Webb's old journal. No one had ever sent him a flower before. Orders came down. Fire upon a farmhouse, rumoured to house Allied medics. Wilhelm hesitated. The structure was marked with a red cross. His sergeant barked. "Orders." Wilhelm aimed but fired wide, deliberately. The others did not. The building collapsed. Screams followed. No one questioned Wilhelm's shot, but that night he sat awake, fingering the trigger of his pistol as if daring it to remember. June 24th. The artillery began at 6 a.m. It did not stop. For hours, then days. A storm of shells pounding the German line. British command called it the week of fire. Edward couldn't hear himself think, or speak, or dream. Just mud, shrapnel, and thunder. 7 days without silence. Some said not even grass would survive. In the chaos, Wilhelm saw something impossible. A dog, Schlamm, matted, limbs worse, eyes wild, but unmistakable. He tried to call out, but the beast darted away into a crater, then vanished. Had it ever been there? Was it just memory? Either way, Wilhelm stood there far too long, until a lieutenant shoved him back behind the sandbags. He never saw the dog again, but that moment felt more real than the war. June 30th, 1916, the night before the Somme. Edward lay in the trench, eyes open. Someone down the line was singing, not a hymn, not a march, something wordless, barely audible. The men listened. No one joined in. They just lay there, trying to remember other songs, other nights. Edward thought of Oxford, of holding a fencing foil, of his mother pouring tea. He clutched the whistle around his neck. It would be used tomorrow. Edward stood at the trench edge, heart pounding. The whistle hung heavy around his neck. He looked down the line. Some men were weeping. Others were praying. One was muttering poetry. He blew the whistle. The sound cut through the roar of artillery. Then he climbed and ran. The field ahead was supposed to be empty, softened by 7 days of bombardment. It wasn't. The machine guns opened like gates to hell. Edward had trained for months. It took 7 minutes for most of his company to die. He reached a small crater, dropped in, and fumbled for his rifle. The boy beside him, barely 18, screamed until he stopped moving. Edward pressed himself against the dirt, whispering, "Please, not yet." Around him, the field became a graveyard, and the day had barely begun. Wilhelm was in a tunnel near Thiepval when the ground began to shake. He pressed against the wall. Dust fell, boards cracked. Above, the British assault raged. Below, Wilhelm's team waited, ready to detonate their own mine if enemy diggers approached. But no one came, just the vibrations of the dead piling up above. He thought of Elise and wondered if she'd feel it in her bones, wherever she was. Edward reached the German wire. It was uncut. The artillery hadn't done its job. Men threw themselves against it. Some tried climbing. Most died with limbs tangled in rusted metal. Edward lay behind a dead horse, gasping. He didn't fire. There was no one to fire at. Just walls of bullets. He thought of the violet, of Eleanor's note, and waited to be next. By nightfall, the field was silent. British command called it a partial success. Wilhelm was pulled back from the tunnel. Half his unit never returned. Edward didn't return either. His name appeared on the company roster with one word beside it. Missing. No body. No medal. Just absence. Wilhelm was promoted to corporal. Not because he asked. Not because he deserved it. Because no one else was left. He stood before his commanding officer, boots soaked in blood and water, and accepted the new stripes. "Try not to die," the officer said. Wilhelm saluted, then vomited behind the latrine. In a temporary field station, a nurse sorting casualty reports found the name Edward Loxley, presumed dead. But someone had scribbled a note beside it. Last seen near Fricourt. Unconfirmed. Possible survivor. The report was never forwarded. The nurse folded it into her pocket, unsure why. Something about the handwriting. It reminded her of a boy she used to know. It rained for 9 days straight. The trench walls caved in. Rifles rusted in men's hands. Wilhelm watched one man sit in the corner, head on his knees, mumbling, "Still raining, still raining." The man hadn't spoken in weeks before that. When the rain stopped, he wouldn't move. They buried him in a shallow pit behind the latrine. No one asked his name. Back in Edward's old regiment, a rumour started. A soldier claimed he saw Loxley alive, wandering the edge of the woods 2 days after the Somme began. Half his uniform gone, looked dazed. No one could confirm it. But the rumour spread. Because they needed it to. Because sometimes a rumour is the only thing that keeps you standing. In Dresden, Elise received a postcard. The handwriting was unmistakably Wilhelm's, but it was short. Unusually short. Alive, still me, still breathing. Pray it ends soon. W. No date, no return address. She placed it under her pillow and cried until morning. Not because it was sad, but because it was something. September 1916. Leaves fell in Wilhelm's sector, but no one noticed. Trees were shattered, the sky stayed grey. Autumn came like a ghost, present. But not really. He sat under a canvas flap, cleaning his rifle, even though it didn't need it. Not for readiness. For rhythm. For something that wasn't screaming. Wilhelm found it in the coat of a dead British soldier pocket, stiff with dried blood. A small black book, pages cramped with dates and thoughts. Day 41. Webb's dead. Loxley missing. They still send tea. He read the name again. Loxley. He tore out the page and kept it. Why, he didn't know. Maybe because the name felt like someone he was supposed to meet. In a British aid station outside Albert, a man was found wandering in socks and a torn greatcoat. He wouldn't speak, only clutched a whistle. Silver, polished. A nurse finally coaxed a name from him. Edward, he said. Edward. What? Silence. Then, still me. He didn't know where he'd been, only that he wasn't there anymore. Edward sat on a cot, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. He flinched at every loud sound, spoke only when asked, ate slowly, like each bite might betray him. The doctor wrote, shell shock, severe, memory fragmented, personality intact, but cautious. He was listed as convalescent, not cured, just surviving. Whatever came next wasn't recovery, it was adjustment. Wilhelm asked it aloud one night, though no one replied. What happens when it ends? What? The others blinked. What do we do after? Someone muttered, find our names again. Someone else, find the parts we left behind. The youngest simply said, go home. Wilhelm didn't answer, because he wasn't sure if he had a home anymore. November 1916. The guns didn't stop, but they slowed. Wilhelm noticed it first, not in the silence, but in the birdsong. A sparrow landed on a corpse. He watched it for a long time. Do you think it knows? Someone asked. No, Wilhelm whispered, and that's the mercy. Edward traced a line on the wall beside his bed, one for every day since he'd arrived. The doctors said his memory would come back in fragments. They were right. He remembered his fencing medal, the smell of toast, a cold morning in Sussex, and Webb's voice, just once, saying, make it home, lad. He cried, just a little. Then he started a new line. For tomorrow. Wilhelm wrote one last letter to Elise. I think the war is ending. I don't know what that means for me. I'm not who I was, but I still remember the stove. I still remember your songs. I hope you've kept the windows open. I'd like to feel air again. W.A. He didn't send it. He folded it and placed it inside the diary page he'd taken from the British soldier. Then he looked toward the west and waited. November 11th, 1918. The guns fell silent. At 11 a.m., the war ended. Edward heard the news in a recovery ward. He didn't react. Wilhelm heard it from a courier with a trembling voice. Some men laughed, some cheered. Wilhelm sat down and wept for everyone and for no one, because silence, after that long, felt unnatural. Edward walked alone through a park in London 2 years later. A pigeon startled him. A child's laugh made him pause. He wore gloves, even in warm weather. His right hand still trembled. Wilhelm ran a shop in Dresden. He smiled sometimes, not often, but it wasn't fake. They never met. But both of them, on opposite sides of a broken world, kept one thing. Not medals, not anger, but a notebook filled with names they refused to forget. Thank you for walking through this war with me. It wasn't just a story of trenches and treaties. It was a story of memory and how some things, once buried, still bloom again. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.